The rain hammered against the windows of the 14th precinct as Detective Camila Torres stared at the crime scene photos spread across her desk. 3 victims in 2 weeks, each killed with surgical precision, their bodies arranged in poses that seemed to mock the very concept of death. São Paulo had seen its share of violence, but this was different. This killer wasn't driven by passion or greed. There was something methodical, almost artistic about these murders that made her skin crawl. The coffee in her mug had gone cold hours ago, but she barely noticed as she traced the pattern of wounds on the 3rd victim's photograph with her finger, searching for anything that might crack this case open. Rafael Lima burst through the door, his usually pristine lab coat splattered with rainwater, clutching a folder like it contained the secrets of the universe. At 28, he was the youngest forensic expert in the department, hired straight from USP, with recommendations that made even the most skeptical veterans take notice. "Detective Torres, you need to see this," he said, catching his breath. "I've been running comparative analyses all night, and there's something about the wounds that doesn't add up." He spread new photographs on her desk, these ones magnified to show microscopic details of the incisions. "Look at the hesitation marks here and here. Our killer isn't as confident as we thought. He's learning, evolving with each victim." The morning sun was trying to break through the storm clouds when they arrived at the latest crime scene, an upscale apartment in Villa Madalena. The victim, Marina Castellano, was a successful art dealer who had been found by her housekeeper 6 hours ago. The smell of death, mixed with expensive perfume, created a nauseating cocktail that even experienced officers struggled with. Camila moved through the apartment methodically, her trained eyes catching details others might miss. A coffee cup still half full on the counter, classical music still playing softly from hidden speakers, a window left slightly ajar despite the rain. "This doesn't fit the pattern," Raphael whispered, careful not to disturb the crime scene photographers. "The other victims were all found in their bedrooms, but she's in the living room, and look at her hands, no defensive wounds. She knew her killer, or at least wasn't afraid of them initially." Camila nodded, her mind already racing through possibilities. The killer was changing his methodology, becoming bolder, or perhaps more desperate. Either way, it suggested they were running out of time before the next strike. Back at the precinct, the pressure was mounting. Chief Inspector Roberto Mendez, a man who had seen São Paulo transform from a violent metropolis to a slightly less violent one, called Camila into his office. The walls were covered with commendations and photos from better days, when cases were simpler and killers less sophisticated. "Torres, the mayor's office is breathing down my neck. This bastard is all over the news, and people are scared to leave their homes. I'm giving you whatever resources you need, but I need results. The city can't afford panic, not with the economic situation already on edge." That evening, Camila found herself in a familiar place, the small bar on Rua Augusta, where cops went to forget their cases for a few hours. The television above the bar was showing a São Paulo FC match, and the regular patrons cheered and groaned with each play, their passion for football momentarily overshadowing the city's fear. She nursed a beer, letting the normalcy of the scene wash over her when Raphael appeared beside her. "You know, I've been thinking about the positioning of the bodies," he said, ordering a guaraná. "Each one faces east toward the sunrise. It's deliberate, almost ritualistic, but not religious, more like an artist signing their work." The conversation was interrupted by Camila's phone buzzing. Another body had been found, this time in Liberdade, the Japanese district. They rushed through the rain-slicked streets, the neon signs of Japanese restaurants reflecting off puddles like abstract art. The victim was a young teacher named Carlos Yamamoto, and the scene was even more elaborate than before. But this time, the killer had made a mistake, a partial footprint in blood, barely visible but enough for Raphael to work with. As they processed the scene, Camila couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that somewhere in the crowd of onlookers held back by police tape, The killer was studying them just as intently as they studied his work. Late that night, alone in her apartment in Pinheiros, Camilla spread out all the case files on her living room floor. The victims stared back at her from photographs, Marina, Carlos and the others, all successful, all between 30 and 45, all living alone. There was a connection she was missing, something beyond the obvious. Her own reflection caught her eye in the dark window, and for a moment she saw herself as the killer might. A woman alone, dedicated to her work, isolated by choice and circumstance. The thought sent a chill down her spine. She picked up her phone to call Raphael, needing to hear another voice, to confirm she wasn't losing herself in this case like she had 5 years ago with the Moema murders that had nearly broken her. "I think I know why he chooses them," she said when he answered. "They're not random. They're mirrors of who he wishes he could be. Successful, independent, admired. He's not killing them. He's killing the gap between who he is and who he wants to be." The breakthrough came 3 days later in the most unexpected way. Raphael had been poring over financial records of the victims when he noticed something peculiar. They all had purchased artwork from the same online gallery in the past year, a small operation called Renascença Digital that specialized in contemporary Brazilian artists. The gallery's physical address was listed as a warehouse in the industrial district of Barra Funda, an area that had been trying to rebrand itself as São Paulo's next artistic hub, but still retained its gritty, working-class roots. Camilla felt her pulse quicken as she read through Raphael's report. This was the thread they had been searching for, the invisible line connecting lives that otherwise never would have intersected. The warehouse stood like a concrete monument to São Paulo's industrial past, its facade covered in elaborate graffiti that had probably been commissioned to make the building seem more appealing to the art crowd. Inside, they found Augusto Ferreira, the gallery's owner, a man in his 50s with silver hair pulled back in a ponytail and clothes that tried too hard to appear casually expensive. He greeted them with nervous energy, his hands fluttering as he spoke. "Detectives, I assure you, we run a legitimate business here. Our client list is extensive, yes, but we pride ourselves on discretion and quality." His accent carried traces of the interior, despite his obvious attempts to sound more cosmopolitan. As Raphael examined the gallery's computer systems with a warrant hastily obtained from a sympathetic judge, Camilla studied Augusto more carefully. There was something off about him. Not quite guilt, but a nervousness that went beyond normal anxiety about police presence. When she mentioned the victims' names, his face paled slightly, and he excused himself to get water. She followed him to a small office in the back, where she found him not drinking water, but frantically deleting files from a laptop. "Mr. Ferreira," she said calmly, her hand moving to her service weapon, "I'm going to need you to step away from the computer and explain what you're doing." What emerged over the next several hours of interrogation was not a confession to murder, but something almost as valuable. Augusto had been running a side business, using the gallery's client data to profile wealthy, single individuals for a dating service that promised curated connections for São Paulo's elite. The victims had all been members, though they might not have known about each other. It was harmless, Augusto insisted, sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning, just introducing successful people to each other. "I never imagined..." His voice trailed off as the implications sank in. Someone had used his service to hunt. Raphael's analysis of the dating service's database revealed something chilling. There was one user who had been matched with all the victims, someone using the alias Pygmalion, who had created a profile so perfectly crafted to appeal to successful, independent professionals that it seemed almost algorithmic in its precision. The profile photos were stolen from a male model's Instagram. The biographical details were vague but impressive, and the messages exchanged showed a pattern of building trust quickly before arranging in-person meetings. The IP addresses used to access the account traced back to various cyber cafes around the city, showing a killer who understood digital forensics as well as human psychology. That evening, as São Paulo's rush-hour traffic created its daily symphony of horns and engines, Camila and Rafael sat in a small restaurant in Bela Vista, trying to process what they had learned. Around them, office workers complained about their bosses, couples planned their weekends, and life continued with its beautiful obliviousness to the darkness they were tracking. "He's not just intelligent," Rafael said, picking at his feijoada. "He's studied us, studied how we investigate. Every crime scene was cleaned of DNA evidence, except for what he wanted us to find. He's playing a game, and we're not the opponents. We're part of the performance." The pattern suggested the killer would strike again within the week, and they now had a list of 12 potential victims who had been in contact with Pygmalion. Camilla made the difficult decision to approach them discreetly, not wanting to cause panic, but needing to warn them. The first was a lawyer named Patricia Moreira, who worked in a gleaming office tower on Avenida Paulista. When Camilla explained the situation, Patricia's composed facade cracked slightly. "He seemed so perfect," she admitted, showing them the messages on her phone. "Intelligent, cultured, interested in my work. We were supposed to meet for coffee next week at a place in Villa Olympia." The trap was set with Patricia's reluctant cooperation. The coffee shop in Villa Olympia was surrounded by undercover officers, its patrons replaced by police personnel, and Rafael stationed in a van outside with surveillance equipment. Camilla positioned herself at a table where she could see the entrance, her heart racing despite years of similar operations. The appointed time came and went, 10 minutes, 20. Just as she was about to call it off, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Did you really think I would fall for such an obvious ploy, Detective Torres? Your dedication is admirable, but you're playing checkers while I'm playing chess. Look behind you." She turned to find an envelope tucked behind the coffee shop's menu board. Inside was a photograph of her own apartment building taken that morning, with a note. "You've been so focused on protecting strangers, you've forgotten to protect yourself. The game isn't over. It's just beginning." The realization hit her like a physical blow. The killer had been watching her, possibly for days. As the team scrambled to secure her apartment and review security footage from her neighborhood, Camilla felt the familiar tightness in her chest that had plagued her during the Moema case. But this time was different. This time, she had Rafael and a team that trusted her judgment. This time, she wouldn't let obsession cloud her investigation. The killer had made his first real mistake. He had made it personal. The surveillance footage from Camilla's apartment building revealed a figure in a maintenance worker's uniform who had spent an unusual amount of time near the entrance 3 days earlier. The image was frustratingly unclear, but Rafael enhanced it enough to make out a partial profile. Male, approximately 35 to 40 years old, medium build, with a distinctive scar on his left hand. It wasn't much, but it was more than they'd had before. Camilla moved into a department safe house in Muca, a nondescript apartment in a working-class neighborhood where the biggest concern was usually loud forró music from the bar downstairs rather than serial killers. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Helena Ribeiro, a psychiatrist at the Instituto de Psiquiatria do Hospital das Clínicas, contacted the police after seeing news coverage of the murders. "I think I may have treated your killer," she said carefully, bound by doctor-patient confidentiality, but clearly struggling with her ethical obligations. "I can't give you a name, but I can tell you that about 6 months ago, I had a patient who described elaborate fantasies that match your crime scenes almost exactly. He stopped coming to sessions after I suggested hospitalization." She provided what details she legally could. The patient had been a failed artist who worked in tech support, intelligent but struggling with what he perceived as society's failure to recognize his genius. Rafael cross-referenced this information with employees at tech companies who had access to the kind of personal data the killer seemed to possess. The list was depressingly long. São Paulo's tech sector employed thousands. But when filtered through other parameters, one name stood out: Lucas Medeiros, 38, who had been fired from 3 different companies in the past 2 years for inappropriate behavior, and who had a registered address in Freguesia do O, not far from where the maintenance worker had caught a bus after surveilling Camilla's apartment. His photo matched the enhanced surveillance footage, scar and all. The apartment building in Freguesia do O was a testament to São Paulo's rapid growth and inequality, a modernist structure from the 1970s that had seen better days, sandwiched between a luxury car dealership and a favela. When Camilla and the tactical team arrived at 3 a.m., hoping to catch Medeiros sleeping, they found the apartment meticulously clean and completely empty except for a single item: a detailed scale model of São Paulo made from what appeared to be thousands of paper fragments. Upon closer inspection, Raphael realized with horror that each fragment was a piece of the victim's photographs, assembled into a twisted representation of the city. But Medeiros hadn't fled. He had evolved. That morning, as the city woke to another grey day threatening rain, a body was discovered in Ibirapuera Park. The victim, a successful architect named Roberto Chen, had been killed differently than the others, more hastily, desperately. Near the body was a note addressed to Camilla: "You forced me to rush my art. Roberto was meant to be special, but you've ruined everything. One more remains to complete my masterpiece, and you already know who it is." The implication was clear. Camilla herself was to be his final victim. The psychological profile that emerged painted a picture of a man unraveling. Dr. Ribeiro, now fully cooperating given the imminent danger, revealed more about Medeiros' sessions. He had spoken about feeling invisible in São Paulo's millions, about being a ghost in his own life, watching successful people live the existence he deserved. The murders were his way of taking control, of forcing the city to see him. Each victim represented an aspect of success he craved: Marina's cultural sophistication, Carlos's respected profession, Roberto's creative recognition. And Camila, she represented the ultimate recognition, the one person in São Paulo who truly understood his work. That night, as the city prepared for another São Paulo FC match that would empty the streets of half their population, Camilla made a controversial decision. Against protocol and her chief's explicit orders, she decided to make herself available as bait. "He's devolving," she explained to Raphael, who was adamantly against the plan. "The architect's murder was sloppy, desperate. He's going to make a mistake, and when he comes for me, we'll be ready." Raphael's brown eyes reflected a concern that went beyond professional worry. Over the weeks of intense investigation, they had developed a bond forged in long hours and shared obsession with the case. "Camilla, there has to be another way. You're not expendable, no matter what you think about yourself." She set herself up in a controlled environment, a furnished apartment in Consolação that the department sometimes used for witness protection, modified with hidden cameras and panic buttons. She maintained her routine as much as possible, jogging in the early morning when the streets were quiet, except for the occasional bakery opening its doors, the smell of fresh pão de queijo mixing with exhaust fumes. She knew Medeiros was watching, could feel his presence like a shadow at the edge of her vision. On the 3rd night, as she sat reading case files with the window deliberately open, she heard it, the slight scrape of metal on metal that didn't belong to the building's normal sounds. He entered through the bathroom window with a fluidity that spoke of practice. Camilla forced herself to remain still, to continue reading as if unaware, her hand slowly moving toward the panic button hidden under the desk. When she finally turned, Lucas Medeiros stood in her doorway, looking nothing like the monster she had imagined. He was ordinary, forgettable, the kind of man you might pass 1,000 times on São Paulo's streets without a second glance. "Detective Torres," he said, his voice cultured and calm. "I'm disappointed you thought I would fall for such an obvious trap. The real question is, did you fall for mine?" It was then she noticed the device in his hand, a dead man's switch connected to something she couldn't see. Her blood ran cold as she realized the entire building might be rigged. The standoff in the apartment stretched into its second hour as negotiators tried to establish communication from the street below. Medeiros had indeed rigged explosives throughout the building, crude but effective devices that would ensure his final artwork would be painted in destruction and chaos. Camilla sat across from him, maintaining eye contact, using every psychological technique she had learned to keep him talking. Outside, she knew Raphael was coordinating with the bomb squad, evacuating the building's residents through back exits, racing against whatever timeline existed in Medeiros's fractured mind. The rain that had threatened all day finally began, drumming against the windows like an anxious heartbeat. "You want to understand me," Medeiros said, almost conversationally, as if they were colleagues discussing a case. "That's what makes you different from the others. They just wanted to stop me, but you appreciate the artistry, don't you? The way each scene was composed, the symbolism in the positioning." His hand remained steady on the dead man's switch, a device that would trigger the explosives if he released pressure. Camilla forced herself to engage, to enter his twisted logic. "Tell me about Marina Castellano. She was your first. That must have been special." His eyes lit up with something that might have been pride in another context. "Marina sold art, but never created it. She was a parasite on true creativity. I gave her the chance to become art itself, to transcend her mediocre existence." Through her earpiece, Raphael's voice provided a lifeline to sanity. "Bomb Squad has located 3 devices. They need 15 more minutes to clear them all. Keep him talking." Camilla leaned forward slightly, a calculated risk to show interest without threatening. "But you made mistakes, Lucas. The footprint at the Yamamoto scene, the pattern that led us to the gallery. Part of you wanted to be caught, didn't it? Wanted someone to finally see you." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. "Those weren't mistakes," he insisted, but his voice carried less conviction. They were clues. For someone worthy of understanding. For you." The sound of helicopters circling above seemed to agitate him. His grip on the device tightened, knuckles white with tension. "They don't understand," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "São Paulo swallows people whole, millions of souls crushed together, nobody seeing anyone. I made them see. I made them all stop and look." Camilla recognized the spiral, the moment where grandiosity gave way to desperation. This was when killers either surrendered or chose mutual destruction. She made a calculated gamble. "You're right, Lucas. The city is blind. But killing me won't make them see you. It will just make you another headline that fades by tomorrow. Another criminal who couldn't handle failure." The words hit their mark. Rage flashed across his features, but beneath it was something else, a deep, existential exhaustion. "You think you're different?" he spat. "You live alone, work obsessively, push everyone away. We're the same, detective, both ghosts in this city, except I chose to haunt it properly." The observation stung because it carried a grain of truth. Camilla had seen herself in the victims, but now she saw herself in the killer too. The isolation, the obsession, the need for purpose in a city that could make anyone feel insignificant. "You're right," she admitted, surprising both of them. "We are similar, but there's one difference. I chose to protect people, not destroy them. It's not too late for you to make a different choice." Raphael's voice crackled urgently. 2 devices remain. 8 minutes. Medeiros laughed bitterly. "Choice? What choice do I have now? Prison, where I'll truly become invisible." He stood abruptly, the device trembling in his hand. Camilla stood too, slowly, hands visible. "You have the choice to be remembered as someone who stopped before it was too late, who chose redemption over revenge. That's more than most get." The next moments unfolded with dreamlike clarity. Medeiros looked at the device in his hand, then at Camila, then out the window at the city sprawling endlessly in all directions. The rain had intensified, turning the lights into watercolor smears. "I just wanted to matter," he whispered, so quietly she almost missed it. His grip on the device loosened slightly, and in that fraction of a second Camilla moved. Not toward him, which might have triggered a defensive response, but to the window, opening it fully. "If you're going to do it, Lucas, at least look at what you're destroying. Really look." He moved to the window, and for a moment they stood side by side, watching São Paulo in all its chaotic glory. Below, she could see the tactical teams, the evacuated residents huddling under umbrellas, the entire apparatus of a city trying to save itself from one man's pain. "They all have stories," she said softly. "Every light in every window. Stories just as complex as yours or mine." His hand was shaking now, the device becoming slippery with sweat. "5 seconds until breach," Raphael warned in her ear. "Tell them to wait," she whispered, hoping her mic would pick it up. The resolution came not with explosion or violence, but with a simple human gesture. Medeiros set the device down on the windowsill, carefully, as if it were made of glass. Then his legs gave out, and he collapsed to the floor, sobbing with the abandon of a child. Camila immediately kicked the device away and radioed the all clear as tactical teams flooded the apartment. As they led Medeiros away, he looked back at her once. "Will you remember me?" he asked. "Yes," she replied honestly, "but I'll remember the victims more." 3 weeks later, São Paulo had moved on to other tragedies and triumphs, as cities do. The Medeiros case had been filed away, the victims memorialized. The city's brief moment of unified fear dissolved back into the usual chaos of 11 million individual lives. Camilla stood in the police department's memorial garden, a small space behind the building where few officers ever went. She had come to add 5 names to her personal notebook, not the victims, whose names were publicly honored, but the 5 people Medeiros might have been if circumstances had been different. The artist, the son, the friend, the lover, the human being who had gotten lost somewhere in São Paulo's infinite maze. Raphael found her there, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the good place around the corner, not the station's bitter brew. "The prosecutor says he'll likely get life in a psychiatric facility," he reported, sitting beside her on the worn bench. "Dr. Ribeiro thinks with treatment he might eventually, well, not recover, but at least understand what he did." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the city's skyline where new buildings constantly rose like steel and glass phoenix. "You saved him," Raphael said finally, "and probably dozens of others." Camilla shook her head. "I just did my job. We both did." As they walked back into the station, the controlled chaos of São Paulo law enforcement enveloping them once again, Camilla realized something had shifted. The weight she had carried since the Moema case 5 years ago had lifted slightly. She hadn't saved those victims, couldn't bring back Marina, Carlos, Roberto, or the others, but she had prevented Medeiros from completing his twisted masterpiece, had found a moment of humanity in the midst of horror. In a city where millions of stories intersected and diverged every second, she had managed to change the ending of just one. Sometimes in São Paulo, that was enough. The case file would read as closed, another serial killer caught, another threat neutralized. But for Camila and Raphael, for the families of the victims, for Lucas Medeiros in his psychiatric cell, and for a city that had briefly looked into its own darkness, the story continued. São Paulo kept spinning, its residents pursuing their dreams and fleeing their nightmares, most unaware of how close they had come to being part of a madman's gallery. The rain had stopped, and somewhere in the distance, the sound of a football match on television mixed with samba from a street party, the city's heartbeat returning to its normal, beautifully chaotic rhythm.